Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 13th session of the 6th cycle of the workshop that was presented on July 20th, 2024, where we finished up steps 11 and 12. Next week, we'll begin a new cycle and start over at step 1. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. We are starting in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I mentioned earlier today, we are starting on the 11th step, but we do a very high level, high speed overview of what we've covered so far, so that if anybody is joining us for the first time, they have an idea of how to, where we are and what we've covered in the past. Again, the Big Book is the set of instructions on how to work the 12 steps, which are the instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. Merely reading the Big Book, however, without experiencing it and doing what it says to do is really, while it's interesting, you're not going to become recovered by just reading the book. You have to actually do what it says to do. You can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. You can read all the instructions you want, but you've got to actually jump in the water to learn how to swim. And that's what we're doing here in learning how to apply the 12 steps. How do we work them and how do we apply them in our life? The cover page to the Big Book states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. We don't get involved in the controversy, recovered versus recovering. The book says recovered. What we're basically saying is that when we have recovered, the problem is removed. I don't have a choice whether I drink or not because I don't even think about it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. It's no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. My old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. Then when we get into another definition, comes in what's called the 10th step promises, which are on page 84, which says, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then we jump over to page 27, which defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then when we look in the appendix of a spiritual experience, it says that this is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, has manifested itself among us in many forms. And then the foreword to the first edition states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. And what we do is we start with the steps, which is step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is the self-knowledge. I know it. I know I'm an alcoholic. I know I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is a mess. But however, as a real alcoholic, the only thing this self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink, and I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings us to step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And all step 2 is making that admission. Do I believe, or am I even willing to believe that there's a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I can answer yes to that question, I'm at step 3. I make a decision. I made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So now I'm making the decision to do the rest of the work where I'm offering myself to God. This is the 3rd step prayer, where I'm asking God I'm asking God permission. May I do thy will always. Now I begin the rest of the work, which starts with step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We have 4 4th step inventory forms that we work with. There are 4 inventories. And these inventories are for resentments, fears, and harms. There's 2 harms inventories, one for our harms that had to do with our sex conduct, and one
without our sex conduct. So we start looking at our harms. How did these things come along? How did these, and it basically came down to, in most cases, we found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we said opposite each name, our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, or our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? Why we had resentments against these people? And it boiled down to these parts of self: our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, our personal relationships, and our sex relationships. So we started to look at our character defects, and it came down to, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Even though something might not have been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person and look, where were we to blame? We're looking at our inventory, not the other person. We see our faults and we list them before us in black and white. We admit our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. And this boils down to 5 main character defects. I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. So these are the main character defects that we're going to be dealing with throughout this process, throughout working these steps. We're going to be dealing with these 5 main character defects. And they also boil down to other character defects that support them, whether I'm a complainer, whether I'm entitled, whether I'm lazy, whether I'm lustful, whether I'm mean-spirited, manipulative, people pleasers. All of these things roll up into the rest of the character defects. And we focus on these because the same situations tend to follow us and repeat in our lives, because our character defects come into play. And we repeat what we don't repair. So we continue to be unhappy and wonder, why me? Why me? Why does this always happen to me? But it's not the other person that we listed either on our resentment inventory or any of our other inventories that it's causing our unhappiness, but it's our character defects that are coming into play. So once we go through these inventories and we list our character defects, the character defects are going to be the same in all 4 of the inventories. Now we're ready to go to step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. What we do with step 5 here is to see what's blocking us off from our higher power. And the purpose of step 5 is to have those things that are blocking us off from our higher power revealed. And steps 4 and 5 are the steps that deal with us. So now we're ready to move to step 6 and 7, where a shift takes place, where we start talking to God and asking him for his help. So the first part of that is step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character, and we just have to be entirely ready. So if we can answer yes with step 6, we're showing that we're willing. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we've admitted are objectionable, all of our character defects? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling on to something we will not let go, we have to ask God to help us be willing, which brings us to get ready for step 7. So we read over the list. Do we want them removed? Hopefully the answer is yes. If not, we pray for the willingness. So we may have some more work to do here on some of these character defects. Then we move to step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And this is where we actually start to work with God, where we're saying, my creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. And this is where we start waiting for those nudges from God. And each morning we add to our prayers, please, God, stop me from being whatever my character defect is and teach me to be someone who has whatever the opposite of that is, which is the character asset. So, for example, if I say, please, God, stop me from being a procrastinator and teach me to be someone who does what needs to be done immediately, and do each character defect separately. Then remember to act as if you're someone who has that character asset. God will not immediately remove your defects because nature abhors a vacuum. If the character defect is removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that may not enhance your life has a chance to come in and be a replacement. And God's going to give you many opportunities to practice the opposite until until he feels you're ready, and then he'll remove that character defect. The use of step 7 in step 10 where the remaining defects get removed. We're doing step 7 as we're walking around living life as part of step 10 as well. See, we've lived our lives shaped by our habits, and a habit is a past action repeated often enough that it becomes automatic. So this step 7 is ongoing. And what we're talking about here is our fight or flight response gets triggered so easily. And our character defects have been repeated so often that they're automatic, unconscious, and it's just part of the way we are. And therefore, they're going to keep coming up for us. What happens is that we get a stimulus that goes right to a response, and we have to learn to pause. And when we pause, we go into that circle of concern, circle of influence, which is overlaid with the serenity prayer, because it's talking about God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Those are the things in this circle that fall in the circle of concern. The courage to change the things I can, the things in the smaller circle of influence, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two, which brings us to the model itself, where we have that freedom to choose, and our decisions are based on the self-awareness, the imagination, the conscience, and our independent will, which we have choices, which has to do with what's called the endowments of the human personality. And that, again, the serenity prayer, I'm focusing on the things that I can change so that it influences my results or my response. Step 7 and the use of step 7 in step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations we might misinterpret as being threatening. Step 7 starts to teach us the things that are unmanageable in our lives. These are the things that upset us and the things we're afraid of. And all of them are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us, are giving more credit and attention to these things than they deserve, and then having our character defects come into play because they're trying to protect us. We don't know any other way of being. That's what this is about. Steps 8 and 9 are the steps that are used to correct the wreckage of the past. So step 8 is where we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 8 is making your list and becoming willing to set right the wrongs of the past, praying for willingness to do what you need to do in step 9. We put our lists onto index cards. We go over them with our sponsor. And to whom and how you will do this is to ensure that you are not creating any further harms, which is why we suggest you sit down with your sponsor first and go over them. Then we're at step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. An amend involves making restitution where appropriate, changing your ways, and in many cases includes an apology. Just to note, an apology without changing your ways or where needed, making restitution is not making an amend. Saying I'm sorry and doing nothing else will not get you any closer to your higher power. The main thing is to amend your ways so that you do not cause the same harm over again. We do step 9 to set right the wrongs of our past and to clean up our side of the street. Once we do step 9, we're done spending any more time feeling guilty. And if some people we've harmed choose not to hold on to their pain, or if they choose to bear a grudge, even in the face of our sincere requests for forgiveness, we must realize we're free of the burden of the wrong, and whatever they do, they do. So when you've completed these previous 8 steps, you're going to be a different person. And that brings us to the 9th step, promises, which I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just focusing on where it says we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And then we went to step 10. Step 10 is where we enter the world of the spirit. This is where we start to be walking with God. Step 10 is doing the same things we did in steps 4 through 9. But while what we did originally for steps 4 through 9 was used to clean up the things from our past, our drinking, step 10 is used to immediately clean up the things as they happen from this point forward. We do a step 10 for resentment whenever we're hurt or upset, a fear whenever we're worried or concerned, or a harm whenever we have a mean thought or actually do hurt someone. After completing the step 4, 6, 7, and 9 part of step 10 for any or all of the inventories, then you do a step 5, call your sponsor with your character defects. Remember, every resentment and every harm is all ultimately caused by a fear. While the step 10 fear inventory is used every time you're worried, concerned, or frightened, it should also be used as a companion inventory when you do a resentment or a harm inventory. So the difference between step 10 and step 11 is that step 10 is done immediately to clean up things as they occur. Step 11 is done at night as a review. So when we go from step 10 to step 11, remember, be content with whatever life brings you. Everything is an opportunity to deepen your connection with your higher power. And this is the thinking that moves you to step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. This starts now on page 86, where it says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving towards all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can apply our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or decision. We relax and take it easy. We do not struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. So step 11 is where I actually carry out the decision I made in step 3 to turn my life and my will over to the care of God. At step 11, I'm willing to have God run every aspect of my life, because based on my own experience in working the previous steps, I've learned that anything God has in store for me is 10 billion times better than anything I could plan for myself. So my prayer life changes in step 11. I stop telling God what he should do and only have 2 prayers. The first one is gratitude. I express my appreciation for everything, which puts me in a constant state of gratitude. And the second is, please tell me what you want me to do and give me the strength to carry that out. So my instructions in step 11, again, tell me what to do at night. We constructively review our day. I look at what I've done without beating myself up. I'm looking for the things I might have missed doing a step 10 on. That means I'm not beating myself up. I'm looking for anything that needs to be corrected, and I'm looking at whatever lessons I might need for that day. Then, upon awakening, I make plans on how my day is going to be. What do I need to make corrections on? How am I going to do this? What do I need to incorporate into today what I learned yesterday? So, what are the things that I need to do? So I plan what it is I'm going to do. I continue to say, okay, how do I plan my day? So based on what I found out the night before, I make plans on how I'm going to make any of these needed corrections and incorporate what I learned. How do I stay connected to my higher power, reconnect as needed, and constantly look for his guidance and inspiration. And sometimes I might wonder, well, how do I know if it's God's will or my will? And one thing I always say, for me, is God's will for me is to never break any of his laws or activate any of my character defects or relapse into drinking. So, it comes down to a day at a time. Every morning, I commit to living a sober life today, and I do it just for today. I realize and recognize every day that I'm sober, but for the grace of God. So, for the 11th step, I like to go zip into the 12 and 12, where they use the St. Francis prayer. Okay. So here we are. We find ourselves at step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, which means we continue to do all of the stuff we talked about. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And this comes from page 89 of the big book, which says that practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. So the first thing we're going to look at is who should be your sponsor. And I'm going to use some non-alcoholic related examples as a first one. So the first one is example number one. I'm someone, I have pain in my knee. All right, so I'm someone who has pain in my knee every time I walk. This is because I have arthritis in my knee. And there's no cartilage and the bone is deteriorating. So I hear that there's a meeting of people who had knee pain when they walk, but now they don't have it anymore. So I go to the meeting and I get a sponsor to give me advice on how to fix this situation. The truth about this person is that she's someone who about a month or so ago was walking her dog, tripped over the leash and banged up and bruised her knee and had pain in that knee when she walked. She went home, put her leg up, put ice on it, and took Tylenol, and after a few weeks, she was able to walk without pain in her knee. Right, that's the first example. Second example is I'm a real alcoholic who cannot stop drinking. I've lost my job, my family, my home, everyone's respect, yet I keep on drinking because it's impossible for me to not put alcohol in my body. I go to AA, I get a sponsor, but the truth about the person I picked is that he's someone who occasionally had a few beers, but on New Year's Eve, he went out with his friends and had 4 drinks. Then he and his friends decided to leave the party and go somewhere else. As he was driving, he got pulled over by a police officer who did a breathalyzer test, and he got a DWI and went to court. The judge ordered him to go to AA if he wanted to avoid going to jail. Now, in both of these examples, neither person has the same problem I do, nor do they need to solve their problem the only way that will work for me. In the case of my knee replacement surgery is needed instead of just putting my knee up and taking Tylenol. In the case of my drinking, only working the steps as outlined in the big book are what's going to help me. Yes, this guy who just had 4 drinks and was ordered to go to AA might be a really nice reason. I use those examples is to point out that if you're an alcoholic, you need another alcoholic as your sponsor, someone who will teach you the only thing that can overcome the effects of alcoholism, and that is working all 12 of the steps. Second is, who should you sponsor? The same is true for being a sponsor. If you're an alcoholic who's not worked the steps, you may be able to get someone started by using the tools of the program. Just don't drink and go to meetings. You'll be fine. Just do what I say. And you end up ordering someone around, acting as their parent as opposed to being a sponsor. And that's not what the program's about either. But I've known many people over the years who their sponsor didn't know how to take them through the steps. So all they do is tell them, just don't drink and go to meetings. That's what I heard for years and years and years. Well, just go to another meeting. I'm having a bad day. Well, I've been to 3 meetings today. Well, go to another one. Well, if you're an alcoholic who's not worked the steps, you can't help someone who has the real problem of alcoholism. So you've got to work the steps. Because in the long run, if you don't teach someone how to connect to their higher power and rely on their higher power, you're really doing them a disservice, because they may be someone who keeps relapsing. And because maybe it worked for you to just not drink and go to meetings, but they're a real alcoholic. They need to have that spiritual experience so they don't keep relapsing, because when they keep relapsing, they become angry, fearful, and harmful, and therefore they get walls up about AA doesn't work. Therefore they become discouraged, and that's what they really believe. AA does work for alcoholics, but only if they know about and are taught how to live the solution. Page 18 of the big book says that a sponsor is someone who's had the same difficulty. So therefore, he obviously knows what he's talking about. And his whole deportment, which is the way he presents himself, shouts at the new prospect that he's a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except a sincere desire to be helpful. There's no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, and no lectures to be endured. Therefore, when when dealing with a difficult or unwilling sponsee, remember, don't be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone who is desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. It doesn't say to drop someone immediately if they relapse, but it does say not to waste my time on someone who's not willing to receive what I'm offering. And what I'm offering is to be their teacher, not their higher power, not their life coach, not their mother, doctor, psychiatrist, or sounding board for their complaints, just their teacher, and using the big book as the textbook on how to get rid of the things blocking them off from their higher power, how to connect to God, and how to stay surrendered. And this is critical because you cannot give away something you do not have. Make sure you're spiritually fit by having worked the first 9 steps and then living steps 10, 11, and 12 as described in the big book every day. Make sure that you know and you follow the directions in the big book. The important point is to be sure that your desire to sponsor is not egotistical. And that's a big thing, I think, with some of the people that we see. Is that, well, I got 30 sponsees right now. Well, when was the last time you talked to them one-on-one? It's based on only wanting to be helpful. Remember, step 12 says that having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, this promises me if I work the first 11 steps properly, I will have a spiritual awakening. Now, some people have a very powerful, like they call Bill Wilson's white light experience. Other people, it's just a more gradual thing. It's both considered a spiritual awakening. But we have to remember that by living steps 10, 11, and 12, I'm continuously having one spiritual experience after another because I'm connected to, guided by, and I have a relationship with my higher power. So the first action I need to take for step 12 is to carry the message to alcoholics. And the message here is that there is a way out of all of this misery of drinking. So just do exactly what it states to do in the first 164 pages, and you'll never drink again if you follow what it says. The only other action I need to take in step 12 is to practice these principles in all our affairs. So you can't plan the outcome of this work. A farmer cannot control his or her crops, but can till the soil, plant the best seeds, water the soil well, and nurture the crops as best as he or she can. But none of this is going to guarantee a good harvest, but ignoring it will guarantee a poor one. So what we do is we plant the seeds of sobriety and recovery in the soil of our lives, and we water them with watchfulness and prayer, and we wait for things to happen in God's time. And to close, I just want to leave you with Bill's words from page 164 of the big book, A Chapter of Vision for You. And remember, in that chapter, A Vision for You, this was written before how it works. It was written before the steps were written. And what it basically is the program in a nutshell, and it's one of the most powerful readings in the book, where he says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless and keep you until then. Amen. So that is step 12. So next week we'll start a new cycle.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.